Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. For today's podcast, we had the honor to spend some time with the amazing Kristofer Alstaad, a climate scientist and a researcher at the University of Oslo. He is trained as a meteorologist with degrees in physics and geoscience. In his PhD work, he implemented a data assimilation framework to combine satellite measurements with snow models. This approach is currently amongst the most promising tools to help scientists estimate how much snow there is and how it is changing. With Chris, we talked about the evolution of technology in science and research, the future of AI in its own research, the climate, and much more. I hope you have as much fun as we did. I am Laura, and I was joined by my great colleagues, Alexa, Asuka, Daniela, Leo, and Nicole.
Hey Chris, thanks for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, we're great, thanks. So could we start with a short introduction? Could you present yourself, maybe tell us about your background and your motivation, and what is your research about?
Yes, sure. So I don't know how far back I should start.
Not too far, maybe.
Not too far, okay. So my background is in physics and geoscience, which is what I did my education in. So I did my bachelor's degree in physics and my master's degree in geoscience. And for both of those, I focused on meteorology and climate science. In 2015, I started my PhD. Because of that PhD, which I finished in 2019, my research has focused on this topic of data assimilation, which is a technical term for combining modeling observations of different kinds. So it's a process that we use to fuse observations and models and basically get better predictions or reconstructions of the climate. So that's what I've been working on, initially on snow and permafrost, and now I'm also working on estimating fluxes, which is basically how much comes out of the surface over a given unit of time. So we're looking at fluxes of carbon and energy and water, and we're using drones to measure that. But my motivation for doing a PhD was basically that if you want to do research within this area of meteorology and climate science, you have to have a PhD, basically. It's a prerequisite for most jobs.
Thank you so much for your insights, Chris. So what kind of digital innovation do you use in your research?
So the main digital innovation, that's quite a broad term. So I don't know what you ascribe to that, but the main innovation we use are different kinds of algorithms and models that we implement on computers. And these are either expressions of physical laws and science, basically, or they are some kind of way to manipulate data in a statistical way and put that into our models. So the main tools I work with are this data assimilation algorithms. They have actually been around for a while. They are based on statistical techniques, or what more technically something known as Bayesian inference. And it's quite interesting that these techniques have actually been around for more than 50 years. So they were developed as part of the Manhattan Project, which is when a bunch of physicists decided that it was a good idea to build nuclear weapons, which maybe was not such a good idea. But from a scientific point of view, these algorithms have been extremely helpful. In the beginning, they were too expensive to use for a lot of interesting scientific problems, like, for example, that we have in climate science. But more recently, with the arrival of more powerful computers, we can actually use these techniques. Another technique that I use a lot is something based on Kalman filter. This is a way to basically run a model, and as data becomes available, as like a stream of data becomes available, you can slowly feed that into your model and correct the course of your forecast or whatever it is you're modeling. This has also been used for a long time. It was used in the moon landing. But again, the fact that we can use this with more sophisticated models is because of the emergence of much more powerful computers. Yeah, basically, I mean, what used to be supercomputers in the 50s and 60s, they would take up a whole apartment building, let's say, in terms of area. I mean, those are less powerful than what our smartphones are now. So there's this famous Moore's law, which is basically the exponential growth in computing power over the last years. This has basically made huge advances in what we are able to model and how accurately we are able to, for example, predict the weather, but also project how the climate will change over the next decades. Especially satellite imagery is very important because it provides us with global coverage, and it helps us to observe many different components of the climate system in remote locations that we wouldn't be able to observe otherwise.
So, Chris, thank you very much. That was very interesting. Actually, are expenses a challenge for using this kind of technology in your research? And by expenses, I mean, do you feel constrained by cost when using this technology?
Yeah, so there are many different kinds of expenses, actually. Perhaps a relatively unknown one is the energy expense of running these expensive climate simulations, because we do this on a supercomputer that uses a lot of energy. And some places that energy will be renewable, some places it's not renewable. So there is actually a carbon footprint associated with running climate models. But I think the fact that a lot of the decisions that we make in terms of climate policy, they're anchored by the information that we get out of these climate models. So that does justify the expense in terms of energy and carbon of running these simulations. And then there is also monetary expenses. I mean, people doing this research, we are scientists, we are highly educated. Unlike what maybe the fossil fuel industry wants people to think, we don't get paid that much, but we do get paid a little bit. So it costs money to hire researchers, and yeah, it costs money to run also these supercomputers and to develop all this infrastructure around observing systems and satellites, and yeah, having the observations and having the professionals needed to run this kind of system.
So, Chris, what are the opportunities and challenge of using artificial intelligence in your work?
So, I mean, artificial intelligence is quite broad. So that's, as far as I understand, that includes a lot of things from robotics to like natural language processing and all kinds of things like that. But I think the main part of artificial intelligence that we are using in climate science and the sciences more generally is what is called machine learning. And this is almost a rebranding of statistics, but it's basically a way for to learn automatically from data. So this is very similar to what we are doing in data assimilation. The really nice thing about it, though, is it can help us to make our models more efficient, because we can run a certain number of models, then we can train a machine learning model on our physical models, and that can capture the kind of first order behavior of our physical models, and then we can explore the parameter space much more efficiently using these approaches. But I think the challenges also are that there are a lot of non-experts, including myself. I'm not an expert in that topic, that are quickly using these techniques, and they may have too high expectations of how well they're going to work. So what we risk happening is what has happened before, which is something called an AI winter, which is basically that there is this initial hype, and people are very excited, and they think the robots are coming and they will do our job for us and they will replace us. But then that doesn't happen, and it turns out they are much more difficult to use, these algorithms, than we thought, and they are much more brittle, and maybe they overfit too much. So we'll see what happens, and I hope that that doesn't happen, and we are a bit more cautious in how we adopt these techniques.
Thank you, Chris. So, when you hear the word technology and nature conservation, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that those two things are almost competing with each other, because technology and technological developments require a lot of resources, whether it's like rare earth materials or energy or water resources. But so there's maybe a conflict there. But on the other hand, I think technology can help us to monitor the environment and what's going on, especially in remote locations, using satellites. And also it's this automation that's possible due to new technology. The technology that's enables this kind of automation means that maybe we have to work less and travel less, and that can help to conserve the environment. And also there's this hope that this new technology can enable more efficiency when we do things on a computer, and it will help us to transition to renewable energy and help us to work remotely and things like that. So all of these things could help with nature conservation.
How do you see the current relationship between nature conservation and technology? How do you see it evolving, and do you think that it has a bright future?
Yeah, I think it has a very bright future. There's a famous saying in statistics that data does not speak for itself. And so the idea here is that we actually need models or science to put data into context and to give it meaning. And I think the future is that instead of scientists maybe more manually running a model and comparing their model to data, what will be happening is that this data will be automatically integrated into our models, and it will be used to help us automatically tune and improve our models and make better forecasts. And certainly things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, they have a role there. But I think there's also a lot of hype in that area. And in some ways, it's like they're almost reinventing the wheel in some aspects. I don't think artificial intelligence will replace climate models, but I think it will be maybe an important component of making climate models more efficient or helping us to improve certain aspects of our models.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Chris, for making time. Any last message to future policymakers listening to you right now?
I don't want to get into a big debate, but I think the most important thing is that the biggest uncertainty in what's happening with our climate is not actually about the science or about our models. The biggest uncertainty is about what we do and how much we continue emitting. So actually what you are working on and this the interface between science and policymaking, this is super important because the behavior of the system is very path dependent. So what will happen in the future depends hugely on the choices that we make. Don't believe in all this focus on individual change. The concept of a carbon footprint was invented by British Petroleum. What you need to do, you need to push policymakers. And I think as long as we look at the economy as some kind of omniscient beast that knows what's best for all of us and we shouldn't touch and we shouldn't regulate things, I think we will get into a lot of trouble. And I think the economy has to internalize the price of carbon, and it has to internalize the cost of climate change in the future and the cost of future generations. I think technologies such as cryptocurrency, as long as we don't find a better way to use them, a simple fix would be, instead of cracking some completely useless encryption, you could use that energy to run a climate model, or you could use that energy for something else. But I think as a species, we kind of need to slow down a bit. That would be great. And I think especially the more economically developed countries of our planet, we have a huge debt that we need to pay.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to check out the description box below for some recommendations. And on that note, some last words from Chris.
Science is not some caricature that you learn about in high school, where you kind of find facts and you hammer down on those facts. Science is much more creative. It's about being comfortable with uncertainty and understanding that the real world is complex, and that we can actually use, by being open-minded and willing to change our minds, we can use data and models to make more informed decisions about what's going on in the world around us.